We're filming a video.
That is what happens when you press record and then the camera light starts glowing there, and video is taken from this and put onto the computer.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we're filming a video about going to the Fringe.
Yeah, we did the Fringe just last weekend. Made a long weekend of it. End of Friday, right through to sort of early evening Monday, and saw 20 shows in all.
We're going to try and talk about all 20 shows.
Mm.
I don't post much video on the internet, so should we, introduce ourselves or something?
Yes, might as well.
I'm Rosie.
And I'm Lewis.
And, yeah, we went to the Fringe. So basically, the way this is going to work, we're going to talk through each of the shows we saw and basically share our thoughts on them. We saw a little bit of a mixture of various things. We saw straight theatre, we saw some comedy, we saw some musicals, and we also did one of the sort of Fringe immersive experience type things. So yeah, we'll talk through all of them, share our thoughts, and at the end, also maybe talk a little bit about general Fringe experiences and also give you our recommendations of what you should see if you do end up going to the Fringe at some point while this video is still relevant. So we started off on Friday. I'm going to get my list up. We started off at the Fleming Theatre at the space at Surgeons Hall with Vote Macbeth, which is performed by Clydebuilt Theatre Company and was written and directed by John Paul Liddell.
Also starring John Paul Liddell.
So why did we choose to see Vote Macbeth?
I think that was one you were really big on. But
yeah,
it was a modern twist on Shakespeare.
I like Shakespeare, I like musicals, and
Yes.
I thought the concept was neat. So Vote Macbeth was a show basically translating the story of Macbeth to essentially the modern media landscape. And it was a lot of fun. I have to admit, I've had a lot of the songs from this show still in my head like a week later. There are some absolute earworms in this show.
It was remarkably catchy.
It really was. I have found myself at least 3 times in the last week going, "Bitch, I'm Hecate."
Yeah, I can confirm this, sadly.
This is the only one we couldn't find the cast for online, or the current cast, so I've got the programme. I think my favourite performances in Vote Macbeth came from the 3 witch newsreaders.
That was an excellent, and sort of a modern take on a Greek chorus, doing the 3 witches as newsreaders presenting the events as they unfolded, and it was really well done.
Yeah, so we had Natalie Masterton, Lewis Storyou, and Molly Cowie, who all just gave some really, really wonderful sort of close harmony singing. They were the sort of constant presences throughout the show, and I just really loved the way they kind of tied everything together, and their harmonies were just so good. So good.
I mean, a constant 3-part harmony, it's not a bad thing if it's done well, and that was done really well.
It really was. Was there anyone who stood out for you?
Yes, absolutely. I was really impressed by Hugh Moore as Banquo / his son Fleance, and he was incredible. He probably had the most physical role of the piece. He had a lot of dance, fair amount done in heels as well, which was very impressive.
It was.
Yeah, he was probably he seemed like the one with the most sort of comfort in performing, if that makes sense. He was somebody very comfortable on stage and very comfortable playing a crowd, and yeah, he was having massive amounts of fun with his role, and it really came across. Just an incredibly charismatic actor.
I think charismatic was exactly the word I had in my head for him as well. So this one gave us quite a lot to discuss, and we came out of it having really enjoyed it, but definitely with sort of potentially a few kind of missed opportunities as far as the sort of structure and the narrative went.
I very much thought that was really interesting. I want to expand on all the ideas they've brought up. There were so many interesting things, like the whole idea of Macbeth as a political election, framed by the witch newsreaders, Hecate as this sort of Rupert Murdoch figure. It was really interesting, but they didn't really go many places with it. And there was this interaction at the end where every member of the audience was given a voting paddle with M for Macbeth and F for Fleance, and at the end of the show you were meant to vote for who you thought was the best leader. Except it's Macbeth. The entire show is showing how corrupt Macbeth is, and how he's been completely consumed by his lust for power, and Fleance is just entirely presented as maybe not quite as an experienced politician as Macbeth, but certainly a much more morally upstanding one. And there was just no real when it got to the vote, everybody except one person in the audience voted for Fleance. And then it felt like the cast were going to do something with that. There was a bit. The last song is called "We Get What We Deserve," and it felt like they were building to. Well, you thought that Fleance was the right choice for the nation, but then they didn't really do anything with that. And yeah, I would be really interested in seeing the show with the same idea, but with a bit more moral ambiguity about who is the right choice at the end.
Definitely. It did feel like they were kind of going somewhere in terms of sort of be careful about what sort of decisions you make, and I just feel like that element of it didn't necessarily pay off the way that I think could have been really interesting with something like that. But it was an incredibly enjoyable production. We came out having had a great time, and yeah, very enjoyable.
Yeah, I think it definitely ended up. I think we came out really enjoying it. Having seen everything else at the Fringe, I think it has slipped pretty low in our rankings. But honestly, if Vote Macbeth is near the bottom of our rankings, that is just a mark of quality for what we saw on the Fringe.
Absolutely. So let's move on to the second thing we saw, which we were very lucky to be able to very quickly slip in between all of the shows we had planned on Friday night.
Oh, that was a 10-minute run, wasn't it?
It was a little bit of a leg over to the Pleasance Dome, and we saw Séance, which was an immersive. I was going to say audio-visual, but it was mostly audio.
Yes, very strictly audio.
Very audio. Production by a group called Darkfield. The setup of this was you go into what is essentially a converted shipping container, you put on a set of headphones, and you have this 20-minute experience in total darkness of a Victorian-style séance, and it doesn't go the way you'd like it to go, is one way of putting it.
Definitely. And I think, why did we want to see this?
You like horror films, and we wanted to do something that was immersive, and we were just lucky enough to be able to fit this in.
Yeah, we were definitely. This was at the start of the Fringe when we had lots of energy, and we felt like there was I certainly felt like any time we weren't spending watching something was wasted, so I was just like, yeah, we've got half an hour, we can get across there, we can watch this, and then we can get back for the other show, and it's going to be great.
How naive we were.
Yeah, that energy did not last. It was a full weekend. But yeah, Séance. It was really interesting.
I'm really glad we did it. And I was the one who was going in absolutely terrified of the whole thing. And it was one of those it was completely unique from anything we did at the Fringe. It was unlike anything else I've ever experienced. And for that uniqueness alone, it was really, really worth it. But there were some elements to it that didn't necessarily work in the situation we saw it in.
Yes, we ended up seeing it at was it 10:30?
10:30 at night.
Yes, and the sort of setup of the experience is that all the lights go out. You've got headphones, and these headphones are so well designed that you really can't tell what you're hearing, whether it's in the headphones or outside you in the in the table at the séance, and that is really interesting, and it really makes you question what reality is, even, which is quite something for a 20-minute theatre show. But one of the things it relies on is there being a large crowd in to see it. A lot of the setup for the séance, the things you hear are other people being asked questions, and when we came in, there were 6 of us there, including us, and it was, or maybe 8.
So it certainly wasn't any more than 8.
Yeah, so that put a bit of it stretched suspension of disbelief a little bit.
Yeah, and the other thing as well is that one of the questions that these people in the séance are being asked is, are you alone? Did you come alone? And everyone was saying yes, but everyone was stood outside in couples.
Yeah.
So again, the sort of suspension of disbelief was a little bit... which honestly, from my perspective as someone who really doesn't do horror at all, was actually kind of appreciated, because it meant that I did have something to sort of... I think you called it a tether. Yeah, something to ground myself with if I sort of realised that it was getting a bit too much for me. And thankfully it didn't, but it definitely was getting up to some lines. There were some really, really cool effects with this. My particular favourite one is at the beginning, they ask you to put your hands on the table and to keep your hands on the table for séance-y reasons. But the table has a pulse in it and like a movement in it. And so when it feels like there's people climbing up onto the table or walking across the table, you can feel that physically. And that for me was, yeah, that did something quite... it felt very real. It felt very immersive, and I really loved those sort of every little detail being thought of in that sense.
Interestingly, the table pulsing is a very classic Victorian séance trick. It's,
really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's neat.
Yeah, one of the when séances were a big sort of parlor game almost. One of the big things was tables designed so that the medium could call. If there's anybody there, knock on the table three times, and they had a device hidden under the table that could then generate those knocks.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah, so
Oh, I like that.
Séance in that sense was really taking sort of the stagecraft of years past and updating it for the modern day, and I thought that was really neat.
So yeah, Séance, terrifying time. Very much, I wouldn't say I enjoyed it. No, I did not enjoy it, but I definitely experienced something, and it was unlike anything else I experienced at the Fringe this year.
It was really interesting. I did find it a little bit like a theme park ride almost. It was very much you all get ushered in, and you all get put in the seats, and and there's an attendant making sure you get your headphones on right, and then they leave, and it's not about somebody performing something in front of you. It's about you experiencing a pre-existing program, and I really enjoyed it. I did think Darkfield were doing a few different immersive experiences at the Fringe, and I did think after I did Séance, I was kind of satisfied with it. I didn't feel a massive curiosity to go and see one of the different ones.
So try at least one Darkfield
Yeah.
thing, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. It was really interesting, and it
Yeah.
was a great way to fill half an hour. But yeah, it's again, like I said with Vote Macbeth, this probably ends up towards the bottom of our rankings. Well, certainly my rankings, but that is just a sign of quality for the Fringe overall.
Yeah.
And I won't be saying that for long.
So we'll move on to our next show, which we immediately legged it back to Pleasance Courtyard. Pleasantstone and Pleasance Courtyard. Thought they were the same place. Absolutely not the same place.
Yep. Very, very separate, regardless of what the map says. So,
yes.
So bear that in mind.
So we ended back at the Pleasance Courtyard for Adam Kay's Undoctored. We saw this because we both read This Is Going to Hurt and absolutely loved it. And I've certainly wanted to see Adam Kay for a while. One of the things that we sort of told ourselves when we were planning our Fringe shows is that we would try not to see stuff we might be able to see elsewhere. So if it was going to be like a big name comedian or something like that who might tour and who might be sort of quite high profile, we weren't necessarily going to prioritise that because we'd be able to see it elsewhere. It's one of the reasons why we had Kathy and Stella solve a murder on our list, and then we found out that it was going to be playing at a theatre nearby us in October. So we went, if we want to see that, we'll go see it in October. We don't need to do it at the Fringe. But
Adam Kay was the exception to that rule.
Yeah, pretty much. This has been a show that I have been really interested to see for a while, and I am incredibly glad that I did. This was such an experience. I've known Adam Kay since the days of the amateur transplants, which I know about because my younger brother was into them and he used to find all the rude songs funny. So we used to play them at home. And then when This Is Going to Hurt came out as a book, I like reading non-fiction. So I had a read of it and I got through that book in hours. I was completely engrossed in the whole thing, and he has such a fascinating style and so much to say at a time when there is so much sort of politicism and a lot of very strong emotional sentiment towards health and politics and the NHS, and that all came through in this show. It was funny and yet at the same time angry and heartbreaking, and there was so much being said that needed to be said here. And quite frankly, we're going from stories about doing things to try and relieve yourself of a kidney stone.
Oh God. That was graphic and painful.
Yeah, to talking about mental health of doctors within the NHS. And
I mean, straight following the kidney stone story, I think was the first time he saw CPR being done.
Yeah,
and that was that was shaking. I think is probably. I'm not sure that's even a descriptor, but it was impactful.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I had completely the same experience with Rosie with Adam Kay. I read. I picked up. It's Going to Hurt just on a whim. 8 hours later, put it down again. He has an incredibly absorbing style that completely comes across on stage, and he's very clearly somebody who knows exactly what he's talking about, who has a lot of experience of what he's talking about, and has the skill to convey it, and that's a rare thing. That's a real talent.
Yeah.
And to convey like very heavy ideas in sort of packaged in comedy, in lightness, and yeah, it just all in all an incredible show.
Definitely. I had a little bit of a flashback to my youth when he started playing the drug song, which is one of the old amateur transplant songs I used to know. And I think I could still sing along with every word. But yeah, there was music, there was some brilliant anecdotes. There was also a bit where a member in the audience fainted and he had to actually get his doctor head on, which it was hot in there.
I completely
It was
understand why
warm.
somebody fainted.
Like, we went back there on the Saturday and I was so glad when I was given a flyer because I could use it as a fan. It was very, very warm in there. So yeah, that's one thing to factor into Fringe things. But yeah, this was
Adam
such
Kay,
an amazing
incredible show.
Yeah.
Like that is near the top of the shows I saw at the Fringe. It was just, I was laughing, I was crying. I mean, if a show can do that, it's a mark of quality, I think.
And in an hour.
Yeah, God, yeah. Was it just an hour?
It was just an hour.
My God, that was. It felt like it went all. There were a lot of stories in that hour.
There were a lot of stories in that hour.
Oh, impactful hour. Yeah, we found it really difficult to get tickets for this. They're selling out quickly.
They might have already sold out.
Yeah.
But...
I mean, we originally planned to do this earlier in the evening, but we could only get tickets for the late night show. But yeah, if you get a chance, if there are tickets available for a time you can do, I would strongly recommend it. It's it's probably. I mean, we didn't see all that much stand-up in the grand scheme of things, but that was easily the best stand-up we saw at the Fringe.
Definitely. Which is not to say the other stand-ups weren't great.
No.
We will also talk about those.
But Adam Kay, just an incredible comedian.
Yeah. So let's go to Saturday.
Yeah, that was the end of Friday. It was
That ended at midnight.
Yeah,
So...
9 through midnight.
Pretty much.
And yeah, that was it was a hell of a day.
It was pretty good. So Saturday morning, we started with a play called Athena. This was performed at Greenside at Infirmary Street by Penn Theatre Ensemble. It was written by Gracie Gardner, directed by Dr. Rosemary Malague, and there was also fight direction by J. Alex Cordaro. This was a play about fencing, and we chose to see this because Lewis used to fence.
Yes, yeah, a while back. And
we thought it was cool, and I liked the fact it was named after a Greek goddess.
Yes, which, spoilers, doesn't actually come up all that much in the play, but it was still a really... Okay, yeah. What did you think of the play?
I really enjoyed this. So it was effectively a two-hander with a third person coming in just towards the end. I did actually find out afterwards that this was a piece of student theatre by by three students from I think it was Penn State.
Well,
which would make sense. But these were just two main characters that I really enjoyed spending time with. So you have your two main characters who are Athena and Mary Wallace. Both of them are teenagers who are into competitive fencing. It starts with Athena beating Mary Wallace in a competitive fight. The two of them decide to become training partners, and it essentially chronicles the two girls' relationships, their relationships with each other, their families, people outside of them, and how it impacts them. And you see the two of them grow individually, and as they're both friends and not friends at the same time. It's a really interesting relationship, and I just found both of them so compelling. So Athena was played by Malika Tatavati. Mary Wallace was played by Emily Majorano. They were both wonderful, and
yes, I really thought it was a play just about the two-handed character piece, really exploring some really well-rounded, well-developed characters. It's they felt real is the best way to put it. There was so much depth there to them, and so much. Yeah, as Rosie said, they were just interesting people to spend time with, and that's basically what the play was. I thought there was a lot of interesting background detail, just sort of hinted at with how they talk with each other, which felt realistic. There were a few points where I thought, oh, is this going to set up some really like obvious clunky thing?
Mm.
Something where the naturalistic dialogue kind of falls away and it becomes very much more heavy-handed, and it never went that way. It always just preserved this feeling of just watching two interesting people work out how they feel about each other.
Yeah, and that's not really in a gay way, but
Yeah,
kind of could be.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely queer elements to it.
Definitely.
And I thought it might be going in a different direction than it did. But yeah, ultimately, yeah, it was just about the platonic friendship between the two of them, and both of them in different ways were people who really needed a friend. I think is fair to say. And yeah, and also the way it was staged, the scenes were interspersed with choreographed fencing battles between the two, with mostly with just quick exchanges of parries and ripostes. But the interesting thing is that the conversation scenes, which are the bulk of the play, were actually staged in some ways very like sort of slowed down fencing bout. It was they really used the stage and traveling across it, like in a fencing bout. How one of the key signifiers of a fencing bout is distance travelled, people being forced back or pushing the other way, and you could see that staged with who had the upper hand in the conversation at the time. And yeah, that was really interesting.
I was going to ask as well, what did you think of the actual fencing?
Really good. Yeah, I mean, I was hardly a competitive fencer when I did it, but yeah, it wasn't obviously stage fencing, which I thought was really good. They were sticking very close to sort of traditional foil fencing style, and yeah, I thought it looked really good, and I could well believe that that was a slightly exaggerated, slightly slowed down version of real bouts.
Nice. So I'm going to scroll down my list because I've got my list up. So after Athena, we went to Underbelly Cowgate and we went to see a show called Dugsi Dayz. This was performed by Side-Eye Productions, written by Sabrina Ali, directed by Poppy Clifford and Warda Mohammed. And we went to see this because this is going to be something that probably comes up a few times in this video. The only set of recommendations we looked up as we were choosing what to go and see at the Fringe was the video by Mickey Joe Theatre. And this was one of the shows that he recommended. And it was basically pitched as The Breakfast Club meets Somali folk stories, and sounds great. So we went to go and see that. Yeah, this is one that actually split us quite a lot in terms of not necessarily thinking it was either good or bad, but in terms of how much we connected to it and enjoyed it. I came out of this feeling really, really positive. I absolutely loved this show. I found it funny. I found it interesting. I think for me, what I liked about it is that there was both something I felt very connected to in the experiences of teenage girlhood generally, and also something that I didn't really know a whole lot about when it came to sort of more Somali culture. And the production company Side-Eye was set up specifically to promote Somali culture and writers and performers. And they did such a brilliant job with this. We had 4 actors in this, and those were Susu Ahmed. This is the bit where my eyesight is awful and I can't actually read. So Susu Ahmed playing Salma, Faduma Issa playing Yasmin, Sabrina Ali playing Munira, and Hadsan Mohammed playing Hani. All 4 of them were brilliant. They were so much fun to spend time with, and I just found this funny. I found it so warm. I loved all 4 of these characters, and I just had a great time spending an hour with them.
Yeah, and as Rosie mentioned earlier, this was one that split us, and I didn't connect with it in the same way that Rosie did. I can completely see why she did connect with it, and I did come out of it thinking that is clearly a very, very well written, very interesting, very well acted, just a really well done play that I didn't necessarily connect with. And I think what Rosie was saying about having about there being the two experiences, one that she could relate to and one that she couldn't, neither of those I could relate to. And I think that was just sort of I don't think I can just relate to things I've personally experienced. I think the rest of the Fringe hopefully proved that. But yeah, I just didn't connect with it. I was also hoping for a few more folk tales, and I didn't really get that. So yeah, I think it was just different lack of a personal connection and a bit of mismet expectations. With that said, I'd probably still it's still in a reasonable position in my rankings. I'd probably put it above Vote Macbeth and Séance, and it was an excellent play. I have no trouble recommending it, but I do have to say it wasn't for me.
Yeah, it gives you an insight into something that you don't necessarily experience on a sort of day-to-day basis. And sometimes that can be sort of positive, and sometimes it can make you feel a little bit more distant from it. Whereas for me, I just found that the warmth of it, and again, just I'm not going to say I could see bits of myself in every single one of the characters, because I think there were some that were very like me and some that very much were not like me, but I recognised other people in them, and I could recognise the sorts of ideas and the people that they were representing. And so I could really see how that world and my world sort of fitted in with each other. And also I did find it just genuinely really funny. And it wasn't without its sort of, not even necessarily heavier moments, but it knew how to sort of get emotions right. It wasn't just a straight comedy all the way through. It was able to really bring out some heavier elements of a culture, again, that I wouldn't necessarily have otherwise related to. I did think there were a couple of directions that I could potentially have seen it going in. I'm very pleased it went in the direction that it did, which is not to say any of those other directions couldn't have been also very, very effective, but I think it worked in getting the balance of tones right in the show.
Yeah, something I thought was really well done is there was quite probably the heaviest element of the show, which I'm not going to spoil, was something that was clearly very well known to all the students at the school. It was very much something they were all aware of, but it was also something that outside of that community, people might well not be aware of. It's certainly an issue very limited to a very specific community. And yeah, I just thought it just thought it was really interesting how they did that. They sort of showed how normalized it was almost. Just how well known and almost expected it was, and that sort of dissonance was really interesting and really well done. I do have to say now, I'm wondering who you related to most of the cast.
It was Hanny, of course.
Yeah, no, that. Yeah, no. Yeah.
I am clearly a Hanny.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
But yeah, all in all, excellent play. It might not be for you. I'd say it's still worth seeing.
Definitely. So after we saw Dugsi Dayz, we went up to Greenside at Riddle's Court to see 5 short plays loosely linked by the theme of crime.
I'm saying nothing else about this. This was clearly the best show we saw in the Fringe entirely. The director especially. Absolute genius, I think. Like a truly visionary director of his generation. I laughed, I cried so much I was dehydrated by the end. It was, I could barely breathe for laughing at the same time as crying as well. It was a real storm of emotion. I would say this is a play that pushes the limits of what theatre can even be. And as such, I would strongly recommend if you're going to the Fringe to see it. And I should probably mention now, is there anything else we need to mention in relation to this play?
We've been friends with the director and the writer, who is the same person for many years.
He is a wonderful person, and his sense of humour really comes across in the play. So yeah, we went to see this play mostly because it was the play done by our friend, and honestly, it did sound interesting. I feel like we might have gone and seen it in spite of that. If it was written and directed by somebody completely different. The setup is, well, it's 5 short plays loosely linked by the theme of crime. 5 sort of 10-15 minute comedic setups, vaguely related to crime in very different settings, with the same 3 actors rotating roles and different pairings of the actors on stage. Those were Jack Gray, Flynn Andre, and Jazz Tizard. And yeah, I mean, leaving aside the hyperbole, which I was putting on because the director's a friend, and I would like people to go and see his play. It was also really fun. It was a very funny play.
It was 5 very funny plays.
It was 5 very funny plays.
Which was your favourite?
Oh, easily the I think I can just give the premise.
I think you can give the premise.
Yeah. The muscle of a loan shark comes to collect on a debt from somebody, only to find out that the person he's collecting from he knows vaguely from back at school. So it's combining the threat of debt collection with this very awkward oh yeah, how are you? Good to meet you. How have you been doing? How did you get into debt collection? Oh, interesting. And it was just, I'm not doing it justice. Just the patter between the 2 actors was absolutely incredible, and yeah, probably my favourite performance from I believe it was Jack Gray who did the debt collector in that, and yeah, just really hit this balance between sort of generally charming young man fresh out of university chatting about how his life is, with this undercurrent of very casual violence, and it was just so well done.
I feel like undercurrent of casual violence is probably quite a good way to describe a lot of these. And that's not to say that there was a lot of violence, and the violence was, and the sort of threat of violence was played for in a very sort of comedic way. A lot of these plays are drawing on a lot of very common genre tropes. I think Charlie, the director, is naming people like Tarantino and the Coen brothers and old westerns and things like that in his inspirations, and those come through very, very clearly. So there is always this sort of undercurrent that something horrible might happen or is about to happen, or what sort of weird twists and turns is this going to take. And again, there's a really nice balance of emotions in this. There's a really great sort of, it's very good at guiding the audience to where the sort of emotional state that you want to be in. That is a very, very interesting one to inhabit, and it's just really funny as well.
Yeah, I would say it goes as far as it can and no further. It never crosses a line, I feel.
Definitely.
It never shows anything horrific, or it's ultimately a very light play, just with this sort of undercurrent of darkness to it, and it is just very funny. I mean, yeah, full disclosure, maybe it's just because, I mean, we're friends with the guy, we like his sense of humour, but yeah, we thought it was very funny, and we'd strongly recommend it. It's just a very entertaining hour.
Definitely. I think my favourite is the last one, which was called The Landlord's Arms. It had all three of the cast members in it, and it's basically two East End mobsters break into a pub to try and extort some money out of the landlord, and things go from there. For me, it felt the most polished of all of them, and it got the most laughs out of me. And the ending was brilliant. I just found it incredibly funny, and it was all in all a really fun and really balanced set of plays.
So that's the first three plays of Saturday, and continuing straight on from that, we were straight into After the Act, a Section 28 musical.
So this was performed at the Traverse Theatre by Breach Theatre. It was written by Billy Barrett and Ellis Stevens and directed by Billy Barrett, with music by Frew and Ellie Showering. Why did we see this? I am a queer. I like watching gay things.
Okay, we can stop it there.
Yeah.
I think we got it.
So again, this was a Mickey Joe recommendation. I think we did scroll through all 3,000 and something shows on the Fringe website at the time we booked. But I reckon that I probably would have selected this regardless of whether it had been put on my radar previously, because the entire concept really speaks to me. So After the Act is a musical about Section 28, as you can tell. I don't know if anyone's watching this, but if anyone's watching this and doesn't know what Section 28 is, Section 28 was a law brought in the late 80s in the UK, which forbid local authorities from promoting homosexuality.
Schools specifically, they couldn't teach about the acceptance of homosexuality as an acceptable way of living.
It wasn't just schools, it's also health and hospitals and anything that's basically publicly funded. But if schools were very much the sort of focus of a lot of this show. And also it was verbatim theatre, and I really, really like verbatim theatre when it's done well. One of my, I'm not even sure I'd call it favourite films, but certainly one of the most interesting things I've ever seen is the National Theatre and Film production of London Road, which is a verbatim musical about the Ipswich murders in 2006.
Yeah,
so
just to say, if you might not be familiar with the term, verbatim theatre is when all the dialogue, all the lyrics, every piece of spoken word in the play is taken directly from quotes from the time. So in this case, in after the act, it was a combination of political speeches and interviews from people who were affected by the act.
Yeah, and also newspaper articles, tabloids, pieces of legislation, a whole host of stuff that fed into the verbatim element. And also, it was also people sort of reflecting back on the time as well as from the time itself. I had a somewhat transcendent experience watching this. It's a topic for me that is very heavy and very powerful, and it's something that I have been sort of thinking about my own experiences through that lens over the last sort of couple of years or so, as somebody who wasn't old enough to bear the full brunt of Section 28, but who was at school when Section 28 was in force, and who I definitely feel like it's something that has affected my life, and it affected the way I was taught, even though it wasn't necessarily legislation at the time. I feel like it's something where the effects have been incredibly long lasting, and watching this was incredibly powerful for me.
It was an intense experience.
It was.
They really captured the fear and the anger at the time. This sort of ridiculous. I kind of want to both sides it, but I mean, come on, this ridiculous bigotry towards gay lifestyles that people just didn't understand at the time, and the horrific things that resulted in. It was so well captured, both from the sides of the people protesting what they thought was corrupting the children. Won't somebody please think of the children? And from the side of the people impacted by the legislation, right from counsellors and teachers who fought against it and were ultimately overruled, and children who grew up in the legislation, and the effect it has when the person you are isn't represented anywhere. And I feel like that's. Would I be right in saying that's something that connected with you?
Very much so. I think one of the things that I liked about After the Act as a piece of verbatim theatre is I think it really captured the poetry and musicality of everyday speech in a way. One of the most interesting things about verbatim theatre is its way of capturing natural speech effectively. And I think the way that it did that was beautiful. It really, really captured something very magical in something that was very ordinary, and it's sometimes something that was actually quite hideous in a way, and I feel like almost a way of reclaiming something that was so horrible and turning it into something so powerful was yeah.
There's a whole the Act 2 opener effectively is this big number, which was Margaret Thatcher's speech announcing the legislation, and they do it as this big. I don't even know how to describe it.
Kind of drag style, yes, I guess is the best way to describe it.
Yeah, this big over the top. This big over the top number, and I said afterwards to Rosie, did you ever expect that you'd be applauding a Margaret Thatcher speech?
But honestly, they just made it so fucking gay.
Exactly. It's about like Rosie was saying, it's really reclaiming these things. This is speech that did so much damage at the time, but now years later we can look back and we're the ones still standing.
It's turned into this piece of satire and not necessarily ridicule, but you know that she would be spinning in her grave knowing that people would be doing that. with her words and turning her words against her as something to laugh at her about. And I find that just, it was so well done. I think it was Ellis Stevens who was playing her in that scene, and what an incredible job she did. What a number that was. The whole cast, so we had Tika Mutamir, Ellis Stevens, E.M. Williams and Zachary Willis. Outstanding.
Oh, incredible.
Such brilliant voices. The choreography was great. This was one of a few plays we saw that had a lot of multi-rolling amongst the cast, and I think this was, for me, the one that did it the most successfully. In terms of how the cast presented it, and also the way that they were able to signal to it through some of the lighting and the projections that were happening on stage. The staging is stunning. It was so well done. It's using a lot of projections. It's using clips from the time, projections of the legal documents, projections of newspapers, all sorts of bits and pieces. And it's so effective. It creates such an incredible atmosphere for this show.
Oh, absolutely. And honestly, something I was really impressed with over the Fringe in general, how bloody impressive is it to write a whole bloody musical? And there were a lot. I don't know if I'm just if it's just it's a part of the world that I'm quite separated from, but yeah, it's just how do you write that many catchy songs and a very impactful plot? All stage it and then just throw it out into the Fringe, this sea of more plays than anyone could possibly see. Like, I feel like if you started on the first day of the Fringe and watched shows like 12 hours a day through to the end, you'd get through maybe half of it.
Maybe.
Yeah, and that's optimistic. It was just so impressive.
Definitely. Also, one other thing I wanted to mention with this that I loved about it is that the way the music was done felt very representative of the time that it was trying to get across. So in the sort of 80s sections, we get a lot of synths. It's a bit sort of new romantic. It's very sort of the sort of music you'd expect at the time. And then when it starts to transition into the 90s, I had this moment where I was like, that music sounds like Underworld. And I love Underworld. And I just loved how it transitioned musically and stylistically through the times that it was trying to portray. I thought that was really clever, and I loved that element of it.
Yeah, absolutely. It was an incredible experience. It was intense. I'm not going to say go in for a nice, chill, easy time. It goes to some. It doesn't shy away from what was happening at the time, and from the effects it had. But it was incredible. It was just a truly incredible experience. And also one more thing I'd like to mention. They really made explicit the parallels between the language used around Section 28 at the time and the language used around the trans community today.
Definitely. They made that very, very clear, and I think that was so necessary.
Yes.
And I'm really appreciative of the fact that they did that.
Yes, absolutely.
I think it was E.M. Williams who talked about the way that they experienced being, who played a character who talked about the way they experienced being non-binary during Section 28. And you can see completely the parallels that stem from their experience to what we are seeing today.
Yeah, I mean, how many times have I heard the whole, I'm not transphobic, I just don't think we should be promoting it.
Exactly.
I just don't think that's something we should be recommending to kids. I just feel uncomfortable around it. I'm fine with people doing it in their own homes, but inflicting it on the rest of us, and yeah, it's a very explicit parallel between between what was going on at the time. Obviously not one-to-one. It can never be one-to-one. But it's close enough that seeing the history of Section 28, seeing what it resulted in, and also seeing that ultimately it went absolutely nowhere except causing 20 years of pain. It's
more than, quite frankly.
Yeah, easily. And it just makes it clear that that trans rights are something people need to fight for at the moment.
Definitely.
Yeah. So that was fun. But yeah,
fun but needed.
Incredible play.
Yeah. So we took a little bit of a change of direction after that. Well, kind of.
We're
staying with the musicals.
This day was kind of a sine graph, thinking about it.
It kind of was.
Athena, Dugsi Dayz, 5 short plays after the act, and then all the way back up for...
We went to see Potty The Plant.
Oh.
This was performed at Gilded Balloon Paterhouse by Little Big Stack. It was written by Aidan Sussex, Baden Jack Burns and Sarah Oakland, and directed by Baden Jack Burns. And why did we want to go and see Potty The Plant, Lewis?
Oh, why did we want to go and see Potty The Plant? Because... years ago, I used to run I was one of the people involved in running a film festival at university, and one of the main jobs for that was watching all the submissions that came in, and rating them and deciding which to screen. And one of them I saw 5 years ago at this point, maybe 6 years ago, was this wonderful little film called Potty The Plant. And I loved it. I loved it so much. It was so well done, and it was funny and dark, and we've been quoting the songs to each other ever since.
Mm-hmm.
It was so catchy and interesting, and it has this really off joke at the end, which meant we felt uncomfortable enough about showing it that we ultimately didn't show it at the film festival. And I was disappointed about that, though I can't argue against it. But nevertheless, it was an absolutely incredible little film that has really stood the test of time. And so when I heard 6 years later that all of a sudden it's a play at the Edinburgh Fringe, I mean, okay, that's what we're doing. And yeah, it was what an experience. It was really well adapted from the short film, for first and foremost. Like they kept the same basic thing, but the same basic plot to it. But the short film originally was 20 minutes long at most. I think it was actually about 15, and the play was an hour. So they added a lot to it to make it work. But it all felt really natural, and they had a much tighter grasp on the humor in the play than they did in the film. I think it was really showing the benefits of rewrites, and ultimately, it was just an incredibly funny, incredibly enjoyable play. I honestly think it was some of the best singing I saw all weekend. Weirdly, out of this dark comedy musical about a talking plant, it was just incredible panache to it. This real presence on stage. Yeah, they were great. They were great performers. They were working with. They had some really funny jokes to the whole thing with this very dark sense of humor that was mostly just on the right side of things. And yeah, all in all, excellent experience.
Yeah, I also saw the original film of Potty the Plant, and I was very excited to see this. I really enjoyed this. It again, I got some really big laughs out of this. I don't want to spoil any of the jokes, but there was a reference to the Titan submersible that did make me laugh a lot, which you missed and you got very confused
Yes!
by. um, my favourite, my sort of standout performers from this were Stephanie Cabello, Sam Ridley, and Zach Burns, who are basically playing a trio chorus of nurses at Little Boo Boo's hospital, where most of the story is set. Again, they have such fun characters. They've got some great solo moments, and they've also got some really great harmonies with each other as well. I really enjoyed the dynamic between all of their characters, and I don't want to say I enjoyed watching the three of them more than I enjoyed watching the main plot, but I kind of did sometimes. And that's more of a testament to how great they were than anything bad about the main plot. I just absolutely loved their performances. And Stephanie Cabello particularly, I just loved her voice. She was absolutely brilliant, and she's sort of playing this kind of true crime fiend, basically. She's trying to solve the mystery of something that's happened, and I just thought she was so much fun, such a great presence on stage, and I just looked forward to every moment that she was going to appear again.
Yeah, I absolutely love those three, but I'd also give a shout out to Sarah Oakland as Miss Lacey. It's kind of a core joke to it's kind of one core joke at Miss Lacey, which is just she's this very happy, innocent, like 8 o'clock children's TV personality who is so deeply unhappy. She has this wonderful number about just how unhappy she is about everything that's gone on in her life, all done in this in this incredibly cheery major key style, and it's fantastic. And she just had a really great sense of timing. Hello.
The cat's arrived.
The cat's arrived.
I'm hoping you can see the cat on the camera, because otherwise
the cat is retreating. But yeah, Sarah Oakland, and honestly, I mean, at this point, I'm just calling everybody out, but
that's fine.
Baden Jack Burns as Potty was also fantastic.
There was some really great. So Potty is a puppet, and there's a really great scene about halfway through where he leaves his plant pot on the hospital desk and joins the three nurses to go up and pull off a. It's kind of a heist, I guess.
Kind of a heist,
yeah. And just the amount of charisma Baden Jack Burns has with his little sleeves, just brilliant. And
that's such a weird way of describing it, but I know exactly what you mean.
I hope people know what I'm talking about. And then finally, while we're naming all of the cast, Alex Singh as Dr. Acula was villainous and delightful.
He had such a presence. He was having so much fun with his role, and that really came across.
Definitely.
And yeah, there was just a lot of there were just a lot of great jokes to it. I would say it's a great time. The joke that originally made me not screen it at the film festival, it's still there. It has been cut down a lot, and given that
and de-emphasized, I think.
Yeah, exactly. And I think before it was like a 1-minute segment in a 15-minute film. Now it's a 10-second line in a 50-minute play.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that just I still think it would be a better play if they just cut it entirely, but it didn't ruin the play for me anymore, and I still think it was just a wonderful time. I even got the merch eventually.
You did. We went back the next day because we had to leg it to our next show. We went back the next day so you could buy yourself a t-shirt and a little pin badge
with Potty the Plant, which is just excellent. It's and Yeah, I mean, what more is there to say? It's a really funny play, and if you're anything like me, you might go in thinking, oh, dark comedy set in a hospital with a talking plant. Is this Little Shop of Horrors? And no, it's definitely not Little Shop of Horrors. It's very different.
Yes.
But
The plant's a good guy.
yeah, well,
Ish.
the plant is a nice guy. But yeah, it's and actually the plant may have, yeah, there was that. Okay, yeah.
Shut up, you're spoiling it.
Hmm.
The only thing I will say, well, aside from all I've said so far against it, is that one of the most quotable lines from the film is that he has boots for his roots and a shirt with no sleeves. And in the show, he did not have boots for his roots, and he did not have a shirt with no sleeves.
And he didn't even sing about it.
And I was very sad.
He did start doing. There was this little reference to to a song that was cut from the original film, and that was where that line was from. But yeah, I mean, what we must sacrifice in the pursuit of progress, I guess.
Speaking of the pursuit of progress,
I have okay.
I guess.
How are you? Please continue.
We then absolutely legged it across to the Pleasance Dome to go and see some more stand-up, and we saw Siân Docksey's "Pull Yourself Together."
Though describing it as stand-up might be doing it a disservice. There was some standing. There was also some climbing.
Yeah.
Some
spinning.
Yeah, a lot of spinning.
Some inverting.
Yeah, significant amounts of inverting. Some noticeable shaking.
Yes.
Yep. The thing with Pull Yourself Together is it's a combination of a stand-up comedy set and a pole dancing routine.
Yeah, so the reason we went to see this is that Siân Docksey is someone who's been on my radar for a while. She is a big supporter of one of the charities I work for. Yes, that's how I know her.
Oh, nice.
And I have been curious about watching her stuff. I have been following her on Instagram for a while, and having the opportunity to actually see her, I thought was worth taking. And I like pole dancing, and I like comedy, and I'm very glad I got to watch this. This had some absolutely brilliant moments, and I think all four of my favourite sequences from this performance involved that combination of pole and also something that's just really funny. There's an opening sequence that involves the Monty Python Dead Parrot sketch, which is brilliant. It is not the first or only time birds come up in that show. There's another one about pole dancing at funerals, which is spectacular. And the whole finale routine is truly, truly delightful. This is a show that has produced multiple moments that I am talking to people about. This is one of those shows I've been going to friends and saying, I just saw this happen at the Fringe. And it was incredibly memorable. I had so much fun at this. And it was absurd, but in the most wonderful and often very relatable way.
Yeah, it was such an incredible time. I mean, I've been saying that a lot, but honestly, it was just a great weekend. And Pull Yourself Together especially, it was so... She was very funny and she could dance on the pole really well. I mean, what more is there to say?
Yes. So yeah, really, really enjoyed this one. I just had a great time and I hope to see more of this. Just, yeah, absolutely brilliant moments. And she's such a fun and very charismatic performer. I really liked the way that she was very good at setting jokes up and coming back to them throughout the routine. There's a section with a sort of container of chips that comes back multiple times, and every single time it comes back in very, very different ways as well. It's just really funny. And yeah, her sort of setup and payoff throughout was really, really enjoyable. And yeah, I really appreciated that about it. It was very well structured. It was very, very cleverly done.
Yeah, just it was fantastic, and I probably wouldn't have gone and seen it without Rosie's recommendation, and I'm glad I did.
Cool. So we're going to finish off Saturday, and we ended up back where we ended up last night, which was the Pleasance Courtyard. And we saw Showstopper, the improvised musical. This was another Mickey Joe recommendation. It's something that I have sort of had on my radar for a while. And we thought, I've only heard great things about them, so why not try them? I haven't been able to figure out who all the cast was because I'm very face blind and I can't work them out. Also, we were sat very, very far back. I do know that the sort of writer was Dylan Emery, and then there were, was it 5 or 6 performers? 6.
6, yes.
We had 6 performers plus some musicians as well. All of them were excellent. It's just a shame that we can't call any of them out by name on how great they were, but they were all great and I thoroughly enjoyed them. So the concept of Showstopper is that it is completely improvised. You get a setting decided by the audience. You get 4 different musical genres also decided by the audience, and you come up with a title as an audience. And then they put on a show for you, basically.
Yeah, and on the night we went, it was a musical set in a haunted castle with music in the style of Guys and Dolls.
Guys and Dolls.
Gilbert and Sullivan.
The Lion King.
The Lion King, and there was one other.
Is it The Sound of Music?
Sound of Music, yes. And the title was The Walls Are Alive with the Sound of Screaming.
Quite frankly, I think either 333 A Ghost Story or Scare B&B would have been a better title.
Oh, Scare B&B!
No one asked me when I had my hand up.
Oh, damn, that's good.
Yeah.
I was going to go for a spirited welcome, but yeah.
Oh, well. Even though our titles were better than what got chosen,
Scare B&B is probably the best title.
Yes, I was proud of that one. Anyway, it was very, very funny. So the basic premise of the plot, which is not spoilers because they'll never do this show again, is that a dad and his 4 children turn up to a haunted castle, basically to bond with each other. The parents have divorced and the children are struggling to cope with it, and the castle is owned by a very kindly, if not slightly strange, old lady called, is it Mrs. Fairweather?
Mrs. Fairweather.
And some of the children get possessed.
Yeah, and just in the time it's taken for us to explain the plot, they had to come up with the plot and songs.
Yes.
And yeah, you could very much see them thinking on their feet.
And very well.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
One of my... I had a moment when we were asking for musical genres and someone yelled out Gilbert and Sullivan. I love Gilbert and Sullivan, and I was very, very excited for this. And when they got to that bit, it was just fantastic.
It was delightful.
Really, really enjoyed that bit. And it was just so much fun. It's just a group of incredibly talented people doing something very talented.
Yeah. It was incredibly impressive, and just imagining them doing that night after night with completely different prompts, it's amazing.
Yeah, I'd absolutely go back and watch it again.
Yeah,
Get a different thing.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. I'd be really up for that.
yeah. Thoroughly recommend. Okay, that brings us to the end of Saturday. Okay, so we're now on Sunday. And we're now exactly halfway through all the shows we saw, so this is long. The first show we saw on Sunday, we were back at Pleasance Courtyard, and we saw a show called Sing River. This was performed by Love Song Productions, written and performed by Nathaniel Jones, directed by Katie Kirkpatrick, with music by Faye James. This was described as a queer folk story about rivers, basically.
I think there was it was sort of combining a modern folktale. I think.
Yes.
I think was the description that kept coming up, and that sounded interesting. So we decided to go along.
I like folk music and I like gay things.
And okay, I did think at the start, like about 10 minutes in, I was pretty much hating it, to be honest. I was dreading being there for the next 50 minutes. I was just I think what it really struck me as at that time was this very sort of this real celebration of sort of pagan traditions and this sort of idea of the idealized past world. What I thought it was a very uncritical examination of how we idealize the past, and that is about as far away from the truth as you can get. Yeah, because 50 minutes later, absolutely enthralled, coming out of the theatre in tears, and this was one of my, I would say, two big shocks at the Fringe. I did not expect that to be that good. It was absolutely incredible. It was using the framework of a folktale that was clearly written for the show, but using a lot of the sort of language and conventions of typical Celtic folktales to parallel an experience. I am imagining the performer must have had in their own life, because he performed it with such incredible genuine emotion. I mean, if that wasn't genuine emotion, my God, that man is an even better actor than I expected. And it flits between this folktale, which is sung in this wonderful classical folk music style, and the performer narrating basically his life and the story, which unwittingly ends up paralleling the folktale he's singing, and is the reason he's come to the river to sing, asking to forget or asking to remember. And yeah, it's such a well-told story about intense themes. It's about I'm not going to go into specifics, but it's about trauma. It's about how experiences shape you, even if you wish they didn't, and how perspectives change over time, and how what you once saw one way you can see very differently a short time later. And
yeah, this was a very, very affecting show. the show, the sort of central theme of the show, the central sort of trauma of the show is something that I have experienced, and it captured a lot of the sort of nuances and ideas and things that I've been thinking about coming to process that sort of trauma in a way that I don't think I'd ever really seen portrayed before. I was very, very enchanted by the whole thing. And I felt like there were things in this show that spoke to me that I didn't feel like I'd ever seen voiced in a particular way before. Particularly about the way that that particular trauma kind of writes itself onto your body and your actions and everything that you inhabit on a deeply unconscious and subconscious level.
There's a phrase there's a description that keeps coming up throughout the play, which is that originally he was supple clay, and this trauma very much imprinted on him.
Yeah, and molded him into a particular shape.
And even now it's left. He's not supple anymore. He can't change himself like he did, and he still feels all the ways it shaped him.
Yeah, and like I say, I didn't feel like that's a sentiment that I'd ever felt voiced in that way before, and it's something that I'd been sort of thinking about and becoming very conscious about in relation to my own experiences. But yeah, I don't think I'd ever seen anyone talk about it that way before. The music was stunning. It was so beautiful. And I also want to mention the space that it was in. So this was in one of the bunkers at Pleasance Courtyard, which does feel like a sort of underground, dingy, small space. And it was sort of performed in a kind of three-sided round setting. It felt like you were underwater. It was really quite special, the way that atmosphere was created in that space.
It created such an intimate experience.
Definitely. And the way that the set was sort of designed and dressed with things like mirrors and flowers, it was so beautiful and atmospheric. I really, really enjoyed my experience there, and I felt immersed both literally and metaphorically for that hour that I spent there. It was I sort of thought, well, it's a show with queer themes and folk music, so I'm probably going to have a reasonable time, but I did not expect to come out so affected by the whole thing.
Yeah, I would say that was one of my biggest shocks from the Fringe, and it's easily a show it's so easily a show I'd recommend. And saying earlier with Dugsi Dayz, back when we talked about that, that was something I felt I didn't connect to. It was describing communities and experiences I wasn't a part of, and I didn't feel I could connect to it. Sing River was something that thankfully I've never experienced, but the way he portrayed it and the way he talks about it, I really felt connected. It was the most probably. I can't even say it was the most emotional show we saw at the Fringe, because my God, that day Sunday at the Fringe
put us through the ringer.
Yeah, we saw some fantastic things, but Sing River, I can't help but recommend it. It will destroy you a little bit, and
but in a good way.
Yeah, it's a cathartic destruction.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So after Sing River, we stuck around at Pleasance Courtyard and we went to see Super, which was created by Matthew Radway. It was a 2-person cast with Max Dowler and Charlie Vera Martin. And this was a show we went to see because the description sounded great, basically. It was a show about character performers on Hollywood Boulevard, and basically their interpersonal drama. So basically you've got essentially this love triangle sort of scenario between Rick, who is Batman, Robin. What was the name of Robin? Robin doesn't appear, so I don't have him on the cast list.
I want to say Stuart, but I don't know.
Cool. Well, the guy that played Robin, and Catherine, who plays Catwoman. This was a lot of fun. This was just a really neat little concept I really enjoyed the way that you basically have the same story being told by two different perspectives. And you're sort of starting with sort of one person's way of seeing things, and actually then you're getting another perspective where actually it's like, yeah, that really wasn't how things were. And I think there was a lot of really fun commentary in there about acting and the film industry and fame and ego. And again, two people, one of whom was probably much nicer than the other, but very interesting people to spend that time with.
Yeah, absolutely. Like Athena, which we saw on Saturday, that was very much a character piece about these two characters. But while Athena is quite grounded and somewhat aggressive, which I think is created by the sort of fencing motif that goes with. Super is much more sort of bombastic, which is an odd word for a two-person play where people mostly stand about chatting. But,
yeah.
But I stand by it. It had a lot of energy to it, and one of the characters, Rick, Batman, who's one of the main perspectives you get on this event, is very clearly he
sees things through the lens of his own ego.
Yeah, that's probably that's entirely fair. I was trying to think of a nice way to say narcissist, and yeah, he's not necessarily a bad person, but he is somebody with a limited perspective. And yeah, it's just it's a really neat play, I think, is the best way to describe it. This wouldn't be one of my recommendations for the Fringe, I have to say. It was thoroughly enjoyable. I had a great hour there, but in the context of other things we saw at the Fringe, we saw things that Sing River left us in tears. Adam Kay made us laugh continuously for the whole hour,
and then cry.
Yeah, and then also cry, and I just think the standard was so high. Super is a really neat play with an interesting concept, but it's just in comparison to the other things we saw, it just wasn't quite enough for me.
Yeah, I'm pretty much with you on that. And that's not to say it was bad in any way. I just had stronger emotional responses to other things we saw.
Yeah.
I also felt like I possibly didn't quite get what I thought I was getting from the description. I thought it was going to be more of a sort of ensemble comedy, which I thought also would work really nicely with the concept. So maybe that was just that perspective coming into it as well. But also, I think we had a pretty rough audience, honestly. I feel like we were the two who were laughing the most.
Yeah, definitely.
Which is weird, because it was funny.
It was.
It had some great lines in there.
I did think it set up a concept, and then it didn't really develop on that all that much. There was you pretty much got the picture after the first two sections of who these two people were.
Yes.
And that didn't really evolve as it went on.
Definitely.
Like you saw them saw them in different scenarios, and that's interesting. And you saw initially it was very much about their own experiences, but as it went on, it was more about their relationship with each other and their different perspectives on that, and that was really interesting. But yeah, it wasn't all that deep in the end of it, and I really don't want to be too harsh on it, because it was a really fun hour. It was I couldn't write a play that good. I know that. but yeah, ultimately the Fringe is just full of truly life-changing shows. And Super it's missable.
It was a nice hour.
Yeah.
Is the best way to describe it, I think.
Yeah.
So after Super, we went and did a bit more stand-up, and we went to see Stuart Goldsmith's show Spoilers at Monkey Barrel. This was written and performed by Stuart Goldsmith.
Yeah, and we were really struggling going into the Fringe to decide which stand-up we wanted to go and see, because a lot of the descriptions of stand-up at the Fringe are just, this up-and-coming star has been celebrated by and has won X awards, and it's like, okay, sure, who are you? Why should I care? Like, I'm sure other people are impressed by you, but you've given me nothing to latch onto. I've heard the phrase "selling yourself on yourself," and it just falls down, because it's the idea that you should want this because it is this. You should want to watch this award-winning comedian because they are an award-winning comedian, and I just don't. There's so much at the Fringe we could see. Why should we see you? And Stuart Goldsmith really solved that for us.
Yeah.
Because in the first line of his description was a joke that we laughed at. And at that point we were like, okay, yes, this is comedy we want to see.
Yeah, and it thoroughly lived up to that. I had a really, really fun hour. So this whole show was kind of somewhat hinged on the climate crisis, and it was sort of promised to be entertaining, not too doom-mongering, and somewhat educational, and I think it fulfilled on all three of those things. There was some really nice little sections in there. I have to admit, one of the things I laughed the most at, one of the things he does is he gets the members of the audience to confess their climate crimes, basically, which are your sort of small things that you do that aren't necessarily beneficial for the environment. And one of the guys in the audience said, "I take long showers instead of therapy." I was like, what a mood. Ow, I feel very called out right now. And that was also very funny. But Stuart Goldsmith as well. Very, very funny man. Yeah. Really enjoyed it.
It was very much... It was distinctly middle-class comedy.
Yes, I think that's a good way of explaining it.
But, I mean...
Comedy by a guy who's in his 40s with
like
kids
that.
and...
Yeah. And he's doing pretty well for himself. He's got money to live comfortably. So it wasn't incredibly subversive. It was quite middle-class, but then... I mean, as much as I'd like to deny it, I'm quite middle class, and I just thought it was really funny. He was I mean, how can you describe comedy? It's just, it made me laugh.
That's pretty much what you want. It made me laugh, and it gave me a few things to think about as well. There was a really nice section about basically finding how to support a movement by what you're good at and what you can contribute. And there was I have to admit, this is not selling the show by me saying I've completely forgotten the name of the sort of theory that he's talking about.
Well,
But
he mentioned the theory of the radical fringe. I don't know if that's what you were thinking
that's
of.
not what I was thinking of, but that was also interesting.
Mm.
But yeah, I'm going to have to now see if I can find what the Venn diagram he was talking about was, because it was very interesting and did give me a lot to think about in terms of contributing to social movements, both climate orientated and otherwise. And yeah, it was an interesting, if not too challenging, very funny hour of comedy.
Yeah, I would say next to Adam Kay, it was just a thoroughly enjoyable hour of stand up. If you're open to slightly middle class jokes and you have a deep seated climate anxiety, then this is the show for you.
Okay, so after spoilers, we headed down to Summerhall to do 2 shows. And the first of these was Hannah Maxwell's Nan Me and Barbara Pravi. We saw the show because I special interest about Eurovision, and I saw Barbara Pravi in the title and I was interested. And I did not get what I was expecting, and wow, this was another show that kind of put you a little bit through the emotional ringer in the absolute best way.
Yeah,
I loved this.
I said Sing River was one of my shocks at the Fringe. This was the other one. I did not know what to expect coming in, and it was. I want a superlative I haven't used, but I can't. But I can't think of one. It was truly breathtaking.
Yes, I think that's a good way to describe it.
It was hilarious. There was these long sections where I was just like doubled over laughing, but also incredibly emotional. This really honest, personal talk about something she's dealt with, and my God, it was so well done.
Yeah, so the show kind of combines almost 2 different elements of one story, which is Hannah Maxwell caring for her grandmother, having moved in when her grandfather was sort of going through end-of-life care, and sort of helping her grandmother to sort of live more independently. And then at the same time, her infatuation with France's Eurovision 2021 entry, Barbara Pravi, which, as a sapphic woman, valid. So valid. I get that. And there were just some absolutely inspired sequences as part of this. There's a whole section about Mastermind that I found absolutely hilarious. There's a section where she's having a sort of romantic fantasy where she's doing this kind of brilliant and also very hilarious dance with a mop. And then there's also some absolutely very tender scenes, I think is probably the way to describe it. I know that some of there's some voiceover. It's sort of a one-woman show with some voiceovers to add some extra people in there. So Hannah's nan does actually appear in the voiceovers as well, which is really lovely. It's very gay, which I always appreciate. And I just... It's such a well-structured, such a well-balanced, such an interesting and personal... It's not a show anyone else could have put on. And it's done with such honesty. And I think that one of the things as part of the show is that Hannah Maxwell is completely unafraid to laugh at, but also take a very serious look at her own flaws, I think. And I think that that's part of what makes it so engaging and funny and also very relatable in a lot of ways.
It's also so well staged.
Yes.
Like it's performed in a lecture theatre. We saw Vogue Macbeth was the other thing we saw that was in a lecture theatre, and we came out of that thinking very impressed, but making allowances for the fact that it was set in a lecture theatre. Like how much can you really do? This is how much you can do.
Yes.
She transformed that space. Partly just some very clever prop usage and projections, and partly just her charisma and the way she controlled that stage. There was a bit of audience interactivity built into it, which was so well done.
It was very, very funny.
Yes, and yeah, it was truly incredible and truly immersive. I really felt like I understood a little bit about what her life had been for the last year, and it was so interesting and so well balanced as well between comedy and emotion. It really sort of starts more on the comedy side, and then it does get deeper and darker as it goes on, but it never loses that light touch. There's probably one of her probably what she'd describe as one of her lowest moments, and it's very, very funny as well, which is I hope it was intentional. Otherwise I feel really bad about laughing at it, but yeah, just this horrendous awkwardness in the morning after.
Yes.
Yeah.
I knew we were thinking of that one.
Yeah, that was so good. And there was this, it was just wonderful. And there's some clever projection work to really get you inside her mind. There's this sequence early on, which is representing watching Countdown with her nan while being distracted by browsing Barbara Pravi's Instagram, and it's so good. It's so well done. It starts in. I don't want to dissect the whole show, but
it's possible to.
It really is. It starts in this sort of audience interactivity bit where it really focuses on it puts up possible countdown games, and she asks everyone to give numbers, to give what words they could come up with. And then as it goes on, the projection just changes more and more towards just going through her Instagram. And then there's this one joke with an Instagram notification that killed the whole audience. It was, just the staging, how she acted it as well. It was absolutely beautiful. I was chuckling. I was laughing about it for the rest of the weekend. It's so well done. And then later on, that same projection, how they've established getting inside her mind. They do that in sort of darker and subtler ways later on, and it's just, it's so good.
The
My
ending
God.
was just spectacular.
Yeah.
It felt so earned, and it was just so beautifully done. I felt quite breathless, honestly.
Yeah.
It was so powerful.
Yeah, this feels like the show that, of all the ones we've seen, is the most easy to miss, because, like, if you weren't a massive Eurovision nerd, we would never have gone and seen this. And this is the one show that you should not miss.
Yeah.
This was yeah, you know how I was saying with Super, it was a perfectly fun hour, but the Fringe is home to some truly life changing shows. This is one of them. Yeah, Nan Me and Barbara Pravi. If you're going to to the Fringe, go and see it.
Yeah, definitely. And then while you're at Summer Hall,
Yes, my God, we really saw some great shows on Sunday.
we did. While you're at Summer Hall, go watch Bangers. Bangers is a show performed by Samuel Arts, written by Danusia Samal, and directed by Chris Sonex. It was a cast of three. Danusia Samal playing Aria and others. Jim Caesar playing Clef and others, and the DJ and some sort of interjections by Juramani Kamara. And oh, we were fed on Sunday. It was brilliant. I came out of Bangers feeling like if Shakespeare had been writing today, this is the sort of stuff he'd be writing. Something that is so poetic and yet so culturally grounded and relevant. And I think one of the things
interesting.
I think it's really difficult for us to see with the sort of historical distance we have, sort of how Shakespeare possibly or was likely perceived by the audiences that he had at the time he was writing and performing. And I feel like what I saw with Bangers is that relevance, that everyday life, those stories that I feel like when somebody from Shakespeare's time would have been watching a Shakespeare play, I feel like that's what they would have felt.
Yeah.
And I think that the fact that this show was so poetically written and it was done so subtly, but when I twigged that so much of it was written in rhyme and verse, and my brain had switched onto that, I was just like, wow.
Yeah, but I have to say, I feel like describing it as Shakespeare is almost doing it a disservice, because I mean the point we're trying to make is that it was very vibrant and alive, but Shakespeare really conjures the image of something quite staid, just because we're so separate from it historically. Bangers was not that. The setup of Bangers is that it's the story of two different people who are going through their night, framed inside a garage music concert, and it's so good. My God, it's I really think I think the best thing any piece of media can do is get you truly immersed in that world, to the point that you almost forget that there's a world outside there's a world outside of it. That you forget that these are performers, that this is a show. Even that they're speaking in rhyme, and there are frequent breaks for rap, and yeah, it's a play where I honestly felt almost voyeuristic at points watching people perform, because I was so convinced how they were acting and what they were showing. It was such an incredible emotional experience and so well done. My God.
Yeah, I loved Bangers. I thought the music was brilliant. It was all original music / original mixes of pre-existing music. I believe Juramani Kamara, who was playing the DJ, actually did do the sound mixing as well, which is awesome. The voices that all of these cast members have were beautiful. And garage is not a type of music I would go for. It's not a genre I'm very familiar with. And I just fell in love with all of this. I thought it was so cleverly staged. It was staged in the round, like a true round. And there was such engagement throughout with every single member of that audience. I think if I'm to give it one teeny criticism,
Be careful.
yes, it's teeny.
Okay.
So this is another show that makes a lot of use of multi-rolling, and there were just occasional moments where I really struggled to sort of tune into who each character and who each actor was playing. And I feel like it's one of those things where I don't want to dismiss the fact that these are very skilled actors, because they really did do a great job of making those characters very defined and very distinct from their sort of body language and voices and physicality and all of those sorts of things. But I just had to, it just took a lot of effort from me to flip that switch, because sometimes they would change very suddenly on stage, and it was occasionally a little difficult to follow who was in which character at the time. So I just feel like occasionally making that a little clearer would have made me put less effort in, quite frankly.
Yeah, I have to say personally, I really didn't have that problem. I thought they defined each of their characters so well with their body language and physicality and the way they spoke. I really didn't have that problem telling people apart, but I can definitely see it. But yeah, I think also it's a show that I feel it takes a lot of elements you probably know, and it re-examines them. It sees why they work, and it uses them in just the right measure. Like there's a lot of sort of meta fourth wall breaking elements to it with the whole framing of the garage music concert. The DJ starts the show hyping up the audience, getting everyone on their feet, getting everyone really into it. And there's all these elements where the DJ kind of flits between where he is in relation to the fourth wall as the show goes on. At some points he's interacting directly with the audience. At some points he's interacting directly with the characters as somebody in the story, as a bouncer or a DJ. And at other points he's almost acting as the narrator or the story writer, with the characters talking to him about how they want to do this, whether they feel comfortable acting certain bits. And that I feel like this sort of fourth wall breaking meta, I want to say meta humor, but that's not quite right. Just meta storytelling generally. It's done quite a lot. This is something that really understands why it works and how it works, and really pares it back to just the bits that are needed to make it as immersive as possible. And also music. It's
so good.
It's not a musical.
No, it's a play with music.
Yeah. But music plays such a central role to the story. I mean, it's called Bangers, and that's very deliberate. It's all about it. It's all about these classic hits, and yeah, it's but it doesn't go for many traditional sort of tropes / stereotypes of musicals. It uses music in the play, but it uses it in such a fresh way. And I mean, honestly, I feel like if anything, we're probably just doing it a disservice as to white middle class people comparing it to Shakespeare and sort of saying how clever the meta elements are. It's just an incredible play.
It's an experience.
It's an experience. It really is. It was my favourite thing I saw the entire Fringe, easily, and hopefully you won't miss it, because it's been getting a lot of buzz, very deservedly so. But yeah, I would say go and see it. it yeah, it is truly incredible. It is an experience of theatre, and yeah, it's like nothing. It feels like nothing I've ever seen before, while feeling so rooted in tradition. It's incredible.
And here's a segue. Speaking of rooted in tradition, hey,
Nice.
on to the last thing we saw on Sunday, which was at the Scottish Storytelling Centre, and it was Tam Lin, A Future Tale. So this is a difficult one to describe. So we had 3 performers. We had Esther Swift, who was on the harp. We had Kirsty Logan, who was a sort of storyteller, narrator type character. And we had Kirsty Law, who was primarily a singer. She also played the guitar throughout. All 3 of the performers are sort of doing a little bit of everything. So people play musical instruments, speaking, singing.
Yeah, I mean, Kirsty Logan, for example, she does mostly storytelling, but she starts to play with I think it's an accordion.
I think it's a squeeze box.
Yeah.
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 But it's like a tabletop one.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's very much a blending between spoken word and music throughout. And what Tam Lin was it was taking the classic Scottish folktale of Tam Lin, who's an elf in the forest who things happen.
Wow, that's so descriptive.
Yeah, things happen, and I mean, how can I?
Should we just direct them to the OSP video?
Yeah. There's a really good video on Tam Lin by Overly Sarcastic Productions, which you've probably heard of. They're very good, and
that's why we went. You'd seen that video and you'd seen the title of the show, and that's why we chose to go see this.
Yeah, and what it actually does is reframe the story of Tam Lin as a story in a near future sort of corporate dystopia, which is sort of, it's an element that's there in the show. It's a lot at the start and it's a lot at the end.
Yeah.
But throughout it feels much more universal, and it's talking about very personal experiences through the lens of Tam Lin.
And specifically, it's not really talking about Tam Lin, the character, but it's talking about Janet, who is sort of the female protagonist of the Tam Lin story.
And ultimately the main character of the story. Tam Lin might be the titular character, but he is, if anything, the love interest.
Yeah.
It's Janet's story.
Yeah, and I think that comes across really clearly in this show. So the story is sort of reframed around ideas of bodily autonomy and reproductive rights, which you can definitely see bits and pieces of in the original Tam Lin story.
In the original story, it's very explicit that she's, one of the reasons she goes out into the forest is to look for something to induce an abortion. It's it's baked into the original story.
Absolutely, and it's very clearly something that has been drawn on to create this story, and something that is so timely right now, given that these are debates that we probably should not be having, and yet we are having to have yet again. I thought we'd sorted this, but no, clearly we haven't.
But as well as bodily rights and reproductive rights, it's also just about defining oneself.
Yes, and selfhood and autonomy and identity, and it was told through some incredibly beautiful music. Again, this was very folk influenced, as you can possibly guess it might be. Absolutely gorgeous songs, some incredibly interesting and complex harmonies between 2 or 3 of the performers. I love a harp. It was lovely to hear that sort of music. And Kirsty Logan's voice. I was, in the nicest way possible, I wanted to fall asleep to it. I felt so relaxed and so calm and so engrossed in the whole thing. And I didn't necessarily feel that way the whole way through I didn't necessarily feel quite so sort of immersed in the whole production. I definitely found that it took a little bit of time to really get into it, and I was sort of struggling a little bit at the beginning to figure out sort of where it was going, what sort of messages was it trying to get across, because there were some bits and pieces to it that hadn't quite sort of fallen into place yet. And then probably about 5 or 10 minutes towards the end, the way that the show sort of switches up and ends, it made everything click for me. I just felt like it really brought all of these ideas together in a way that was both beautiful and terrifying in the same way, because it doesn't return to this sort of near future dystopia. It returns to today's dystopia. And it proved just how necessary this show and this story was, and how important these messages were. And it was such a fascinating experience for me, being something so beautiful and so relaxing, and yet so urgent and so powerful at the same time.
And also, it was just giving more praise to the music. It was very clear throughout that these were people who were really very experienced to it at their respective instrument. They were so comfortable working at, and they were pushing it to the limit, just to find out what they could draw out from it there. And it just created this beautiful music, which was it was experimental at points, but ultimately so serene and traditional. And yeah, it was alongside Sing River as a show which took a folktale and used it to parallel really modern, relevant experiences. And I think it was so well done.
I think it is definitely one of the most unique shows we saw.
Yes.
It was such an experience, and I think it's going to be one of those experiences that possibly isn't for everyone, but it was for me. So I would absolutely recommend this one.
Yeah, absolutely. So that was everything we saw on Sunday.
Okay, and so we move on to Monday. And the first show we saw on Monday, we went back to Greenside at Riddles Court to see Ophelia, and this was performed by Bristol University Spotlights.
Yeah, in what became the first of sort of an accidental Deus student.
So this was written by Lola Annesley and was co-directed by Lola Annesley and Ella Strauss. Actually, one of the largest casts we saw at the Fringe.
Yeah, weirdly.
Yeah, all very impressive. So this was essentially a sort of modern retelling of Hamlet from Ophelia's perspective. I know the story of Hamlet, but I've never actually read or seen it performed, whereas you actually have.
Yeah, I saw a production of Hamlet at the RSC, and yeah, it was a very interesting take on it.
It was. There were some bits of this that I really, really liked, and for me, there were the sort of two elements to it. The first of which was the set design, which I thought was really interesting and really clever in the way that it was sort of moved and shaped around the action that was going on was very, very effective. It had a very sort of... It was haunting, but it was quite subtle in a lot of ways, and I really, really liked that about it. And the second bit was the acting. The cast was absolutely fantastic.
Just incredible casting all around.
Definitely. Do
you want to? Or?
I'll start off. The people I want to give a sort of name drop to, Lily Walker as Ophelia. She absolutely held my attention throughout the entire show. She was on stage the entire time and had just such a very sort of haunting and delicate presence. A very sort of... It was both strong and fragile at the same time, which I found very, very fascinating to watch. And then the other two I would like to shout out are Albie Marber as Polonius and Hen Ryan as Laertes, who were both really, really interestingly played. Very interesting how they were portrayed in the script, and I really loved the way that they were brought to stage by the two of them. They had such a presence to both of them, and I think that the way they were portrayed, given what I know about them in the original play of Hamlet, it felt very fitting, I think. I think they really got a good handle on who their characters were, both in the original and in this sort of modernised version of that production.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure about Laertes as this kind of... Is it kind of a lads?
He was a lads, but a sort of gap year lads.
Exactly, like a posh layabout who's been a bit spoiled.
Yeah,
doesn't quite know how to face the world. I'm not sure how accurate that is to Laertes, but Polonius as this like incredibly self-important businessman who just like loves being a dad and dispensing sage advice or what he sees as sage advice at any given opportunity. Just a man who really loves the sound of his own voice. I can relate, and feels that he has something really important to share with the world about how he made himself into who he is today, and he wants to tell you about it right now. Like that was perfect. The perfect understanding of Polonius. Like that is Polonius. That is who he was then, and it is a perfect interpretation of who he is now.
And I think I can see from that how the Laertes interpretation works. Well, how that works together as this sort of nepo baby kind of...
It's
someone who's never wanted for anything in their life sort of idea.
Yeah, which makes a lot of sense, actually. I mean, in the original play, Laertes is much more of a... I don't know, kind of a noble figure. He's sort of corrupted by Claudius, and but ultimately he is kind of the hero, sort of ish. I mean, nobody's a hero. Everybody dies horribly, but he's probably the closest to an unproblematic noble character in the play. But
interesting.
Yeah. But he is. But with that said, they do play a lot with that, with how everybody in Ophelia, everybody but Ophelia, his sister, sees him as this sort of wonderful figure, despite being very obviously a bit of a
dick.
Yeah. So that was very well done.
Yes.
And as well as those three, I'd also love to give a shout out to Luca Cook as Hamlet. He was he's an actor with an incredible... Well, for a start, he is a very big, handsome man, and that doesn't sound like much, but especially against Ophelia, who's this very sort of waifish figure.
Yes,
I think it would be
word.
Fair to say. Hamlet looks like sort of a normal man that somebody has gone into Photoshop and just enlarged him like 10%. He has sort of this incredible presence to him.
Yes.
And it starts with this great charisma and this sort of manic energy to him just beneath the surface. That comes across very charming and romantic, if a bit intense. And then as the play goes on, you can see him collapse in on himself. Hi, Caradwan. This is our cat.
More cat.
She is our favourite.
More cat. Hello, little cat. Yeah, you can sit there if you like, small one. Hello.
But yeah, you can see Hamlet really claps in on himself as he as the events of Hamlet play out, and he goes through the absolute ringer. And between this and I also saw a production of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern a bit back. I really think Hamlet might actually be a character who's most interesting to see from another perspective beside Hamlet. He's a really interesting character to look at from the outside. He's this deeply unstable young man who's very intelligent, but honestly, that's what's driving his destruction more than anything. And especially in Ophelia, seeing him collapse and seeing him snap and seeing how he treats Ophelia it was quite intense and incredibly well done.
Yeah, I sort of really enjoyed that sort of dual descent into sort of effectively madness in a way that the two of them experience sort of alongside each other, and how that impacts their relationship with each other. I think one of the things that I did find very interesting about the script is that they actually give Ophelia the to be or not to be speech, which I thought was a really neat little subversion of that, something that is probably the most famous bit of the original play. I think it was one of those shows that I thoroughly enjoyed. Again, I wouldn't put it on the must-see list, but if you are sort of at a loose end and you like Shakespeare and different retellings and interpretations of Shakespeare, I thoroughly enjoyed it. I thought it was a really well staged, really well crafted production with some really, really excellent performances from the whole cast.
With that said, I'm probably going to be a bit harsher on it. I did think it was going to examine some really interesting and intense themes, but it felt like it was written by somebody who either hasn't gone through some of those things personally, or who hasn't really who has consciously tried not to put their own experiences into the script. It was very focused on retelling Hamlet, and at points it felt a bit like a sort of photocopy of a photocopy to me. It was somebody else's take on a story rather than a piece of genuine. I felt that it was going for a lot of the same themes as Sing River, at least in part.
Yeah, that's true.
And that was such a honest, raw piece of emotional theatre about those themes that Ophelia kind of came off bad in comparison. It was still really well done, and I'm still gonna say it was a good hour. It was a good play, and actually for student theatre, it's incredibly impressive. But yeah, I mean, it's just up against great stuff at the Fringe. Yeah.
Definitely. And actually, we're moving on to another play that was also from a company at Bristol.
Really?
So it's performed by BPM, and the B stands for, I think it's Bristol Performance Movement.
Oh, neat.
This was at the Space on the Mile, and the show was Pressure Cooker, which was written and directed by Jesse Milson. So this was a play about 5 university students, medical students, most of whom were in their final year. They've just graduated. They've had their sort of final celebration ball after passing their exams. They've got somebody who is a first year along with them, and they get back to their flat the morning after, and things have gone very, very wrong. And the play is essentially a character piece as the 4 sort of final years try to deal with the fact that they now have somebody who is a fresher unconscious, very unwell, having taken multiple substances through their own persuasion, and they're essentially trying to deal with both the medical emergency and also a lot of interpersonal drama between all of them. We saw this because I liked the concept. I'm always interested in these sorts of character pieces where you get a bunch of people and you put them in a situation and see how they react. And I thought this was a brilliant example of that. I found all of these characters very, very compelling. I wouldn't say I enjoyed spending the time with them because some of them are terrible people. No, actually, that's a lie. They're all very flawed people.
Yeah.
They've definitely got their foibles, but actually I think all of them are probably quite good people, now I've said that. To differing
mostly,
extents. Yeah.
Mostly. Sort of, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It varies.
It varies. Again, this was just such a well-acted piece. So we have a cast of 5. So we had Fran McDade as Tiff, Jamie Egan as Matty, Hannah Kendall as Florence, Evantha Gee as Will, and Maya Chawla as Harvey. I think Fran McDade was probably my favourite performance, but it's a tough call. All of them were absolutely brilliant. And I just think that this was such a well-written piece of theatre.
Yeah, I'd probably go for Jamie Egan myself as Matty.
He was great.
He was fantastic, but honestly, the entire cast,
Absolutely brilliant. These were very, very compelling characters, very well written. I think they felt very realistic. I think that the situation they were in was compelling. It was tense. I was on the edge of my seat the whole time. I was thoroughly gripped by the story, and I really enjoyed it. It was sort of like, I think it was the tension, but it wasn't so tense that it was overwhelming. I think that's one of those things, particularly saying that I'm not a horror person at all. And it's not a horror play, but that sort of tension that comes with horror, I think there's definitely a balance of making it sort of accessible while also powerful and impactful, and I think this play does that so incredibly well.
Yeah. Ultimately, it was a play with a really strong concept, which is medical students trying to treat a medical emergency at home, despite not really being in any fit state to be doing medicine. And it was a concept that was incredibly well executed. I think we saw a few plays with great concepts that weekend that didn't quite reach the full, what we thought was the full potential of them.
Yes.
Like Vote Macbeth and Super sort of spring to mind. Both plays which we went to see purely on the strength of the idea, and which mostly delivered on it, but they both still left us with sort of wanting more coming out. Pressure Cooker definitely didn't do that. It was just really excellent character writing throughout. The dynamics were really well set up, and they did something that I really like, where you get new perspective on earlier events as the play goes on, and you learn more about the characters and what's sort of been going on behind the scenes, and that was so well done. And yeah, I thought these characters were excellently realized, really well explored, and put into this horrible, tense situation where every one of their flaws was sort of laid bare for everyone to see, and it just made an incredible piece of theatre.
I think this is one of the shows where we did definitely see some of the limitations of the fact that the Fringe is in so many venues all around the city. This was basically done in a hotel conference room, and it was a show where there definitely were some slight errors in terms of the sort of tech side of things being lit that shouldn't be lit, things not being lit that should be lit. There were definitely a few points as well just in the blocking where the blocking became a little bit distracting. So you're sort of focusing in one area of the stage, but over in the other area of the stage, there's sort of a kind of some miming going on that just was a little too heavy at times.
Yeah, like if in this situation you're focusing on more on me scratching Kerry's head than Rosie talking, that's sort of what we're talking about.
Yeah, and it was just a few really, really tiny errors like that sort of... It doesn't ruin the show in any way at all, but it was just like, oh yeah, this is a show that is being performed in a hotel conference room, rather than necessarily meaning that I could stay immersed. And I don't think this has any fault of the cast, but it was one of just the few times where I was a little bit thrown, just because it's amazing how many venues and shows that we get to see and get to be put on during that time. But at the same time, it was definitely... It definitely did throw me a couple of times. But the play, the acting, the staging, otherwise, absolutely brilliant. Absolutely loved this one.
Yeah, even with some technical faults, I think the strength of the writing and the acting carried it into... It's not like my absolute top of the Fringe, but it's definitely in the upper half. It's definitely something that I would say I'd recommend it.
Absolutely.
I would unqualified recommend it if it's worth making time to go see.
So the second to last play we saw on Monday and of the Fringe was a working title. We went very quickly from the space on the Mile to the space on Nidri Street, and this was performed by Collision Theatre. It was written and directed by Michael Bryson. We had a cast of 4, and this was a show all about a writer slash sort of a theatre slash film writer trying to write a script.
Yeah, and I think criticism's really interesting, actually. I feel certainly very conflicted about being negative to any piece of work, because they've gone out there and done something incredible in bringing this to life, writing a script, directing a play, getting the actors, and then performing it at the Fringe of all places. And putting it out there for everyone to see. So I think I don't want to be negative about this. So I'm just going to let that hang there.
I think this is one of those plays that also had quite an interesting concept on paper, but I think it was one of those plays where it felt like some of the ideas just, again, weren't necessarily fully realised in a way that felt interesting or new, or at sometimes not even necessarily complete within the story itself. So the concept is we've got a writer, Liam, who's played by Connor Mather, and he's trying to write a script. Some of the time he has 2 actors who are basically performing out some of the script that he's doing. They were far and away my favourite bit of the show. They 100%. Were brilliant. So they were Oljus Kudabayev and Karis Hopkins. Loved both of them. They were just funny and so physical, and I just loved the way that they moved. It was just really, really funny.
Yeah, and that core idea to a working title, a writer like trying out all these different script ideas and seeing them brought to life by these 2 actors, that really worked.
It did. And then we also have the appearance of Liam's sister, Is it his sister?
I think so.
Alex, who is played by Jocelyn Ball, and she's there essentially to try and bounce ideas off. And I feel like this is one of those dynamics that, again, I feel like there were ways that this could be pushed in a way that's a little bit more interesting. Like, obviously, they have a very fraught relationship with each other. There's some stuff that's gone down in their past that they're not particularly resolved or over. And I just found it quite difficult to get emotionally invested in that element of the storyline. I think there possibly could have been more potential in just letting the two of them bounce ideas off each other and having these two actors perform them out. I feel like that sort of interpersonal drama almost distracted from what was good about a working title rather than enhanced it.
Yeah, I really felt, as with Ophelia, that this was one of the plays where the writer's sort of lack of lived experience really showed. Which I might be. It might be that they don't have lived experience. It might just be that they don't want to put it in. But it felt very taken from other fiction rather than reality. Like there's this argument between Liam and Alex as sort of the event in their past is revealed, and it feels so very obvious. It feels like I've seen it in 100 shows before this. It's something. It doesn't feel genuine. It feels like somebody thinking that this would be an interesting idea to write about and trying to write about it taken purely from how they've seen other people write about it. And yeah, I found that quite disappointing. And there's also this big theme throughout about how all art's been written. There's every story that could possibly be told is told, and what a writer's left to do. And I just feel like look, you're at the Fringe, for God's sake. Look around you. There's 1,000,
3,000
easily. Yeah. Brand new, exciting ideas out there across the city of Edinburgh for this entire month, and you're here talking about how rom-coms can be formulaic and there are too many superhero movies out there. It's just like, come on, expand your cultural reference. And for people who wanted to talk about how played out art is, there were a lot of references in the play that were sort of quite self-indulgent. Look how well read I am, sort of thing. But they were all very middle of the road references. Like you've got T.S. Eliot and William Wordsworth and Ocean's 11 and Macbeth, and it's just, if that's how far you think art reaches, just see more things. Just go expand your horizons. So I thought that aspect of it, especially that idea that the art's sort of finished, I didn't connect to it. I think that could be interesting from somebody with a sort of deeper knowledge of art, but from them I didn't really get that.
And I guess it's difficult because we don't know whether those are the views of the writer being expressed through the character or whether that's just the character and his very limited worldview. At the same time, I feel like there was a really interesting concept in this show, but I felt like there was too much distracting it.
Yeah, and I do feel like the show was framed pretty explicitly as this is a peek into this person's life, the writer's life, and
yeah, I just think if I would have been very happy spending an hour with a writer coming up with madcap ideas and two people trying to act them out.
Yeah.
I would have thoroughly enjoyed that. That was a really nice little concept, and I just feel like it possibly got a little bit bogged down in trying to add those more sort of heavier elements that didn't necessarily succeed.
Without the sort of depth that those elements need to land.
Yeah, I mean, one of the themes that comes through in the argument between Liam and Alex is talking about caring for an aging parent or an ill parent, and
after seeing Nan Me and Barbara Pravi,
right,
like that was a play that was deeply, painfully honest about what it's like caring for somebody like that's told from such a unique, original perspective. And compared to that, A Working Title in that aspect just felt very, very obvious, very played out.
Yeah, it had some nice ideas, but it didn't necessarily, I think, realise everything that it wanted to do.
And I'd just also like to say, Liam, the main character, Liam, came across as a really unpleasant character in the play, and I don't think that was examined. And I'm not sure if they understood how poorly he came across. He just a very fundamentally selfish person.
Yeah.
And I don't think that was well examined or necessarily well understood. And that ultimately it was a play that I don't think that was that good, which also rubbed me up the wrong way in a few aspects.
How do you think I'm going to segue from what you just said into our final play?
Okay. Let me think. So there's rubbed me up the wrong way. Don't think was that good. I don't think that's gonna go. Go on.
Speaking of fundamentally selfish people,
hey,
we are on to our final show that we saw at the Fringe, and this was The Rejects. We went back to the Space on the Mile, and this was performed by Sharkbait Theatre and New Celts Productions, written by Jess Ferrier and directed by Ian Dunn. And this was a show about 5 people who go for a job interview. 5 very different people who go for a job interview, and afterwards they all go to the pub. And it's what happens at that night at the pub. I loved this show again. I thought this was really funny.
I mean, why did we want to see
Why
it?
did we want to see it? Because we hate capitalism.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much.
Yes.
I have applied for a lot of bloody jobs in my time.
Yeah.
Luckily in stable employment now, but applying for jobs is miserable. And I was really interested in a play sort of exploring that.
Yeah, and in a very funny way. It was very much sold as a comedy. And I think this is another one of those shows that really balanced that sort of comedic element with definitely a little bit of an undercurrent of sort of social commentary or criticism, or however you want to put that. I thought this was a really, really great ensemble cast. So all of the characters have numbers rather than names. So we have Robin Riley as 1, Jess Ferrier as 2, Abby Price as 3, Lex Joyce as 4, and Isla Campbell as 5. And every single one of them was brilliant. If I'm going to give a shout out to one, I'm going to give a shout out to Isla Campbell, who isn't necessarily the emotional core of the piece, but I think she's definitely one of the most relatable and most likable of all of the characters. But again, not without her flaws or foibles. I've got cat hair in my eye. This is really annoying. Why do you do this to me? I thought this was really well written. There's some really nice choral elements, some more sort of non-naturalistic theatre elements to it, and yet also some very, very natural elements to it as well. And I think it blends the two very, very nicely. I'm gonna pass to you.
Yeah. I'd like to give a shout out to Robin Riley as one, actually. I thought she was sort of the most grounded of all of them.
Yes.
She was very much portrayed initially as being the sort of straight woman of the group, with all of them with these very intense, well-defined personalities, and her as sort of the nice person tying everyone together. But as the play went on, you started to see everybody's sort of hidden depths, and she was no exception, and she really portrayed that sort of switch from somebody who's very good at seeming composed to what she was actually thinking below the surface.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was a very well done play.
One of the things I've noticed ever since we saw it on social media is that Sharkbait have been putting out what are effectively like top trumps on each of the characters with a little sort of bio. And Four's bio is manipulate, mansplain, male boss, which I feel like sums up a lot. I feel like that gives you a good sense of the sort of humour that this play is going for. And it's a very sort of heightened realism. I feel like all of the comedy there is quite exaggerated. It is sort of taking kind of archetypes, sort of recognizable archetypes, and playing off those, but with a real groundedness to them as well.
And also playing with them.
Yes.
It takes a lot of joy in really establishing these strong archetypes to the point that you feel like you have a grasp of some fundamentally one-dimensional characters, and then they really add to that and sort of subvert some of your expectations and explore the depth of these individual characters until you see sort of the face, the stereotype they present to the world, and you also see what they are behind that.
Absolutely. I think these, again, are 5 very well written, very well realised characters with enough to them to make them slightly exaggerated and definitely very funny and comedic, but also you still feel very grounded to all of them, which it's some very, very clever writing. It's some very, very well written stuff. And I think it was just staged very neatly and very tidily, I guess is the way to say it. Everything was slick, everything moved well. The staging was very simple, but it did everything it needed to do to transform for all of these characters and all of the situations that they're all in. And it was just a thoroughly, thoroughly enjoyable experience.
Yeah, it was really professionally done, and with I feel like I said for a working title and Ophelia, they were both reaching for subjects that I don't think there was lived experience in. The Rejects, I really felt there was lived experience. Yes. Like I feel like there was speaking from the heart about what it's like to go through job interview after job interview and what that does to a person. And yeah, I thought it was very honest, very funny, and just really well done. Great piece of theatre.
And also they played the Smiths. So
well, I mean, is that necessarily a plus?
It is if you're you.
I mean, I like the Smiths, but also Morrissey.
Yeah, but it's Heaven Knows I'm Miserable Now.
Which is a great song, but
and
again,
felt very appropriate for this show.
Like that was on the nose, but I respect it.
Yeah. Okay, that's all 20 shows we saw at the Fringe. So I'm going to end with 2 questions. First of all, what was your favourite?
Bangers. It was such an immersive, interesting experience.
I'm going to go for After the Act, because I felt very seen in the whole thing, and I laughed, I cried, it put me through the ringer, and I felt like it was the theatre that we need to see. And it was made to speak to me, honestly. And so my second question, if you were to do the Fringe again, what would you do differently next time? Or what advice would you give yourself?
Go for longer. Like, instead of trying to see like 7 shows a day across 3 days, maybe do like five shows a day across 4 days. Just give yourself a reasonable amount of time, because yes, you want to see as many shows as possible. You also want to eat at points. You and having some time to sort of sit down where you're not rushing from one venue to another, when you can just chat about everything you've seen. Maybe see if there's anything if there's anything fun coming up that you haven't planned. I think that would greatly improve the experience. I think we were both like sort of running on fumes by the end.
Definitely. And I think there's needing to rest and refuel, like, physically, and I also think emotionally as well. I really did feel like I'd been put through the ringer a few times during the Fringe, and I would have just liked a little bit more time to emotionally process some of the stuff that we saw.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely sort of... There are at least a few... on Sunday, we went straight from Nanmi and Barbara Pravi, incredibly emotional experience, straight into bangers.
Yeah.
Incredibly emotional experience.
Right.
And that was intense.
Yes. I mean, bangers was quite literally intense.
Hey. Oh, and I'd also like to say, thinking about it, if I were to do it again, I think I'd like to do one day where I don't plan anything, where I just having done a couple of days already, just put a day aside to be like, okay, what do I fancy right now? I'm going to look through my vast collection of flyers. I'm going to look on the Edinburgh Fringe app, and I'm going to see, what sounds fun. I'm going to hear somebody on the street say, 2 cats on a tape. I play both cats. And be like, yes, I do have time to go and see that, and just properly go with the flow. I feel like I'm really glad we planned it thoroughly, but I think if next time we do it, I want to plan some time not to plan.
Yes. The other thing I'd do is bring a fan.
Hey, yes.
My God, it was warm.
Yeah.
Oh my God, it was warm. Okay, I think that's the end of the video, because we've been going for like 3 hours.
Something like that.
Cool. This is gonna be fun to edit.
Yeah. Well, I'm Lewis.
I'm Rosie, and this is where we'd have an outro if we made videos regularly.
Or we were professional, but we're not.
We're not.
All right. Bye.
Bye.